This is James J. Morbitzer. We call him Dad. He is in uniform here in Chicago just after being drafted on April 4th, 1943. He will eventually join the 10th Mountain Division and be sent to Italy during World War II. Up until I was 17, this was about all I knew about his time in the war. At 17, I learned by chance that Dad climbed Riva Ridge in Italy during his time there. One evening, I took a phone message from a man who called our house looking for Jim Morbitzer. I took the man's name and number thinking that it was a waste of his time to call. Dad never took calls at home and didn't return phone messages. He returned this one, which turned out to be his sergeant from the 10th Mountain Division, who asked, "Jim, do you remember what you were doing 40 years ago today?" Dad replied, "I was climbing Riva Ridge with you." And that started my journey. I tried to ask him about it, but it didn't get me anywhere. Dad never spoke of his experiences during the war, which is common. He told me later he never wanted to romanticize war. He thought it was an awful thing that young men were ripped out of their homes to die for some fat old man's ego. I believe I was in my 30s when I found out Dad was awarded the Bronze Star with oak leaf clusters. Dad didn't want the medal. He didn't want the citation. The medal was lost to history, and I'm told he threw the citation away, and one of his siblings had to dig it out of the trash. Requests from relatives turned up nothing. In 2022, I decided I wanted to know more. I wanted our kids to know more. He may not have thought much of it for a lot of reasons, but he did something others considered great, and I wanted to know what it was. In November 2022, I started the process of getting the medal replaced and trying to discover how he earned it. This is done through the National Personnel Records Center in conjunction with the National Archives. The information they wanted was extensive and detailed. Things like his address when he was drafted, where he worked, his mother's name, his social security number, and his draft number. Through a lot of online digging and Ancestry.com, I found it all. Now, this sludge is to discourage stolen valor. Stolen valor is the act of fraudulently claiming to have served in the U.S. Armed Forces or to have earned military decorations. It's not only detestable, it's a federal crime. The process to get the medal replaced took 2 years. Imagine how excited I was after waiting all that time when the medal arrived in the mail. Then, my immediate disappointment when I discovered there was no citation. I still had no idea why he was awarded that medal. Well, thank goodness for social media. There are social media groups associated with the 10th and their descendants. The group highlights and celebrates their achievements. They directed me to Kelly Schmidt of the Denver Public Library. The Denver Public Library houses the archives for the 10th Mountain Division because they were stationed there. Kelly is the archivist, and she sent me Dad's entire war record and summary. Now, it wasn't much, and honestly, I still can't make heads or tails of a couple of the pages, but it was everything I needed. Those social media groups are also where I found out the descendants were organizing a tour to retrace the men's steps all the way to the last battle in Tourmaline. The 10th Mountain Division transferred to Camp Swift, Texas from Colorado for regular ground training in June 1944, and Dad was assigned to the division there. The word on his paperwork was assigned. Dad always said it was an all-volunteer division, but he never volunteered. Everyone on our tour said their dads, uncles, grandfathers had to apply and provide 2 letters of recommendation. They also needed some experience in the field. Rock climbing, skiing, hiking, things like that. Growing up on South 17th Street in Columbus, Ohio, Dad had none of that. The 10th Mountain Division Medical Battalion departed Camp Swift by train on Christmas Eve, 1944. They arrived in Camp Patrick Henry, Virginia on December 27th. At Camp Patrick Henry, they made final preparations for deployment for security reasons. The men did not know where they were headed until they were well out to sea. They set sail from Hampton Roads, Virginia, January 6, 1945, on board the transport ship USAT General Meigs. Dad always said everyone was sick constantly on the trip over. Now, before you go looking on a map, Hampton Roads, Virginia isn't a road. It's not even a town, but a channel that a number of rivers empty into to become part of the Chesapeake Bay. The ship arrived in Naples, Italy, January 18th, 1945. The fighting was constant. From letters written home, the Germans liked to target medics. Medics didn't carry weapons normally, and without a medic, the soldiers needed more resources to tend the wounded. 1 month later, on February 18th, the attack on Riva Ridge began. Okay, the prep and climb had to be done at night. Night vision goggles did not exist at this time. Dad described it to me once as darkness being pushed right up against your face. The 10th hid in small villages at the base of the mountain. The first-hand accounts say the men could only come out at night or, if absolutely necessary, during the day, only dress as a woman.
Okay, now this long range right here, that's Riva Ridge, and Dad and the fellow soldiers, they actually had to stage everything in the middle of the night so as not to be seen. We're standing on top of Mount Belvedere. Now, the Brazilian Expeditionary Forces tried to take the German troops on top of Mount Belvedere a number of times and couldn't do it. And the reason is because over there on Riva Ridge, the Germans had spotters, so they could see everything they were doing. That's why everything had to be staged at night, and that's why they had to call in the 10th Mountain Division.
The 10th had to take Riva Ridge first. Riva Ridge is actually a series of peaks, and after great study, the commanders found 5 routes up. They didn't just climb it or climb it just once. They developed a tramway for each route, which was run by a small motor to get the wounded and equipment up and down the mountain, but the men actually had to do the climb. They had to climb it. One report said they had to climb it up to 4 times that night. They allowed us to ascend one of the routes, which coincidentally was the route Dad took according to our best records and the local historians. This was the hardest hike Teresa and I had ever done. Some places the trail was only 8 inches wide. You had nothingness on one side and steep cliff on the other. At one point, the guide announced, "Now here you may have to use your hands and knees." This was not in the brochure. I can't imagine doing this more than once in a day, much less a number of times at night. But I'm 57 and Dad would have been 21. He would have had years of training. However, it still would have been monstrous for him to do. It was amazing to see some of the same structures he would have seen and pass the same buildings he would have passed on the way up. They're still there. This is a view from the top. Not much and full of trees, but look closely. These are not 80-year-old trees. The Germans had cleared it all for a better view. This is growth since the end of the war. On the way down, we got a shot with Dad.
So, this is the trench. Okay.
Io sono abituato, sai, a quelle della linea gotica vicino dove sto io, ma Antonini per esempio, quelle cazzo.
So, this is the trench where the Germans were dug in. And I just saw the bunker, didn't get too good of a picture of it, but they would use this trench to go from the bunker to their position. Probably not walking upright like I am. Probably crawling.
We stayed for 5 days in an area called the Hill Towns. The 10th Mountain Division liberated these towns from the Germans. Before the 10th got there, the people were starving and impoverished. They are still, to this day, so appreciative. Each town we visited rolled out the red carpet for us with parties, music, endless food and wine. One day I think we had 3 receptions, but there was always, every day there was always a celebration. Of the 10th Mountain Division veterans still alive, very few, if any, are in any shape to travel. However, we were able to talk to people who were alive at the time of the German occupation of their town. This man is John Carlo. He was 4 years old during the German occupation. He told stories of how before the 10th got there, they had 1 jar of marmalade for 7 people in their house. Then, after the soldiers arrived, they brought marmalade, pasta, and more eggs than they had seen in years. This man's name is Domenico Alesi. He was 11 when the Germans occupied his town. He left when the Germans announced for every German soldier killed by an Italian partisan, 10 people in the town would die. His mother and sisters moved immediately to a town that had already been liberated and occupied by the Allies. He moved to a different town with other relatives. Once at the top of the various peaks that made up Riva Ridge, the 10th were able to surprise the Germans in their foxholes. The German army was so confident that no army could ascend the peaks. Some were on alert, some were even asleep. During the next couple of days, the resistance intensified, but the 10th eventually took Riva Ridge, and after that they were able to take Mount Belvedere. This broke the Gothic line. Now, these men were mountaineers, and the German soldiers weren't. Once the Gothic line was broken, the 10th Mountain Division, due to their training, were able to move so fast in their push north that it was hard for U.S. air and artillery support to keep up with them. This speed also made it impossible for the German army to regroup and reorganize. When they arrived at the Po River, the 10th had to cross it on boats at first. They met light resistance, and soon air support was brought in, and a pontoon bridge was used to get the rest of the 10th across the river with the men and equipment. They feared that the Germans would make it to the Brenner Pass, an artery used to move men and equipment and an easy escape route to Austria. To inhibit this, the 10th was ordered to take Verona, but once the 10th arrived in Verona, it was already occupied by Allied forces. Seeing this, the 10th Mountain Division turned its attention to Lake Garda and the towns of Torbole and Riva del Garda. Lake Garda is a 30-mile long lake in northern Italy and the biggest lake in the country. Torbole is where Dad earned his Bronze Star. Today, this is an amazing resort area. It's full of families enjoying restaurants and amusement park, endless water sports, rock climbers. But back in 1945, it was a place of carnage. The 10th came up the east side of Lake Garda and needed to clear a pass through a number of tunnels. Finally arriving in Torbole, the German SS was holding the town and had machine gun nests. Understand, this is April 30th. On April 30th, the Russians had already occupied Berlin, and Hitler was dead. Essentially, the war was over, even though the official end would be May 8th. The 10th commanders tried to talk to the men holding the town to avoid another battle, but the SS were not regular German soldiers. Regular German soldiers really didn't even care for the SS too much. The SS was Hitler's private army, so they were fighting for ideology, not land, not money, or resources. Eventually the 10th took the town, and Dad was awarded the Bronze Star for dodging machine gun fire as well as shelling to aid the wounded, but also to carry the wounded to aid stations back after the guns were silenced, according to the citation. Dad may have hated everything about the war, but our kids need to know that Dad risked his life to help others in the same situation. Dad may have hated everything about the war, but our kids need to know that Dad risked his life to help others in the same situation he was. Dad knew no enemy. He related an anecdote to our brother Tom once of riding in an ambulance with a wounded German soldier, and the rosary he was carrying fell out of his pocket. Dad, of course, returned that rosary to him, and I seem to remember anecdotes of him helping other German soldiers. At the end of the day, it's very important to remember that's who Dad was. He didn't want anybody to suffer. He treated everybody with kindness, even those people who disagreed with him to the point where they were shooting at him probably a half an hour before. This is what I want to carry forward, and this is what I want our kids to carry into adulthood. Thank you.